'tis many's a gay night, from dark till daylight, I spend with people of high renown. But in all their grandeur and heaps to squander, my heart would wander for sweet Omagh town.
Good morning, evening, afternoon, middle of the night, or wherever you are, or what time of day it is. You're very welcome to join us here on Sweet Omagh Town. Calling Mr. Ford?
Mr. Ford is on the other end of the line, and still living in splendid isolation.
Sounding better since you had a sex change, Mr. Ford. You don't understand what I'm talking about, do you?
No.
Your little audio was a little thin, and I had to change the lead, right? And
right.
In the sound business, we have male and female leads,
right.
Okay? You were a male, but now you're a female, and you're not as raspy as you were.
Oh, my goodness.
We've got your feminine side out now, so...
Have you really? Well,
you don't know what's coming next year.
Well, that's very good.
Well, there you are. I've never seen you stuck for words before now.
Well, you know, Donald, I was a teacher for many years, and I am now a retired gentleman.
Yes.
Right, I retired a number of years ago. But do you remember the interview we did with Miss Crammond, who had been a teacher in the town?
Very well, I do remember.
Out by Crevenagh, I think.
Yes, she did this, yes.
Wasn't she a remarkable woman?
She was, and I think she had a sister, maybe taught round, maybe not in Omagh, but maybe up the country somewhere from memory. Again, we're back. Must look for that. Yes, she taught in the model, and I remember she was around Omagh at the end of the First World War. Now, here's a lady who was there and seen the end of the war and or could capture in voice the atmosphere of the town and the people who lived in the town. And she talked about her father hiring farm labourers in Strabane, and the maid came up and stuff. And you know, sorry, you can read that and it doesn't mean anything to you, but when you hear it spoken in the local dialect and the local people talking about how they came here and they talk of the town and the families of the town, you're talking 100 years ago. But yet we have the living voices bring it all to life. So,
and you know, she was in a way a sort of representative of another generation, because to this day I don't know what her first name was. She was Miss Crammond.
Funny, I asked Vina Jameson, a good friend of mine, asked her because she would have been at her church. And I think she belonged to the First Omagh Presbyterian Church, and I asked Vina. And she said, yes, she was, but they're not sure. We think possibly Lou or Louise, but maybe someone out there will remember what her first name was.
My goodness.
But we all knew her just as Miss Crammond around the town.
Miss Crammond.
Yeah.
Oh, no. And do you remember we went out to interview her and we had a list of questions? And the way we would normally do it, I would ask questions, and then you'd come in with questions.
Yes.
I think we got maybe one question out, and her hand went up, and she just talked. We were like two schoolboys.
We sat and we listened.
We sat and listened.
But see, when you listen back, you realise that she had something to say.
Oh, absolutely.
She talked about the upper 10 in Omagh.
That's right, the 10 families that owned Omagh.
Yes.
You know, and even using a phrase like that, it's a throwback to another time.
Yes, it is indeed.
You know, when you think of her memories, we're going back to before partition.
Yes.
And we were so lucky to have the opportunity to talk to her, and she was so open with us, and you know, just to talk about her memories, and they were so clear, and she'd obviously thought a lot about what she was going to say, and in a way, when you listen to it, and I mean, it's quite a long interview.
It is.
But it is a pure social history of this town.
It really shines a light back for those that are interested in history of their own town or any history. It does paint a lovely picture of what life was really like. You know, there's no airs or frills or editing. This is as she spoke it. It is quite long. I think maybe it could be 1 hour long. But live with it, and I tell you, you'll learn a lot from it if you want to, if you're interested in that side of history of Omagh. She taught in the model school. Now, the model school is where the Omagh College is now.
That's right.
And then the old academy actually was somewhere near where the bank was, thereabouts. And then they moved in 1938, I think, to the present site. So
That's right.
From
And you know
memory,
what, Donald? You've just given away one of the answers in the quiz we did.
I certainly did not. I'd have you know. The quiz. My God.
Oh, indeed.
I'm not sure I've had any responses yet or not. I haven't checked the emails. I don't check emails, and I don't. I'll look at it sometime this week. But
Well, we'll give the answers out at some stage. You know?
we will indeed. But Miss Crammond, we don't know her name, and we don't have a photograph of her that we can see or find at this stage. And if anyone does know these things, just give us a wee thumbs up or a wee text or get in touch with us any way you wish. Just it'd be nice to have something, but we don't have it now when we play the video, because obviously people will hear it in retrospect. But it might be nice to have a listen to it and see what the human side of this and what this lady was like. Obviously, I think she must have been a very private lady. I don't think, because I'm looking through
so.
Dr. Mitchell's books, and I could see plenty of social events and things, but her name was never in any of the photographs. So
Yeah. Well, enjoy the interview anyhow, because I haven't heard it in years, and I'm looking forward actually to dipping into it again.
Right, okay. And there's plenty more to come, so don't be worrying if you're going to be locked in for the next X weeks or whatever time it is. We will make sure that you live in grit and misery every day, around 6, 7 o'clock, instead of watching the news. Really have some pain and listen to us. Eh? On that happy note, Mr. Ford, I shall go back and
On that note, Mr. McGorgan, goodbye.
Good luck. Bye. Take care.
My father was really born in County Down.
What part?
Near Banbridge, somewhere there. His father, that would be my grandfather, came from Scotland, from around Dundee.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was a land steward for some of these big estates. And then he must have changed to County Down and was there for some time. And then he changed to Stranraer for the same reason, although he was a farmer when he was in Stranraer as well.
Well, what possessed him to move to Omagh? What was the reason?
That my father moved. He was looking out for a farm, and I think, you see, he was going to build a house at the place in Stranraer. Cavan was the name of the neighbourhood there, and he was going to build a house, and I don't know whether another brother was more or less looking for a farm too. He was at Tremelton at that time, and he was living on an island at Tremelton, and he wanted a farm, and he was on the lookout for a place too. And this place must have been in the paper or something, and my father came up and he bought this place. And then later, the same year, my uncle bought a place in Wicklow at the Vale of Avoca. And the other Crammonds live there. That's the only Crammonds that are here and there.
Oh,
And there'll soon be none here because James isn't married. There's only the one over there now, when there used to be 12 and 13 in that house. Now there's down to one. So there's not many Crammonds left here now when I go, and James, unless he marries. Well, the fair days were held the first Tuesday of every month, and the fair green was at the Gallas Hill. Now, anyone driving cattle took them early in the morning before there was any traffic, and they had to be careful because the animals could see their images in the windows, and would maybe make for a window and break a window. So then that was the cattle fair, and the sheep fair were held up there. But the horse fair was held usually in the afternoon at the bottom of the town, down where behind where Dunn's, the car park where Dunn's store is now. And that was also the pork market. It was held there. I think every Saturday it was held. And there was also then the back market. You know where the back market is? where Crawford's and Wilson's shop is now. There was a blacksmith shop there, and on our way to school we very often went down that entry and watched the horses being shod, and kept ourselves lit for school. I hear the sound of the anvil still. Well, then in those days there were two stations.
Two railway stations?
Two railway stations. The proper station was at the top of the town, more or less where the fold is there. The fold now is looking out on that area, and the trains, of course, came in there. Well, then there was a good station at the foot of the town, now where the library is, and many a time we stood and watched them shunting the carriages there. The cattle and goods came in there, and that was the goods station. There was quite a entrance. At the entrance into it, the station master's house was there, and then there was an entrance, and you went up steps into the station and bought your ticket, and then you were on the platform. Well, then you see the different trains come in there, then it's from Enniskillen, and of course the one to Belfast and then Londonderry. And it was quite a nice little station. There was just a little bookshop in connection with the station where you could buy a paper or something like that, or magazine, but no other shops. Well, of course, some goods came in there too, but most of them came to the bottom of the town. Well, then there was also in Omagh the egg stores. There were men bought the eggs from country people, and then they would distribute them to, I suppose, the shops or send them away. There were two egg stores.
What about
there was Clement's egg store was at round Dublin Road corner there. Mr. Clemens lived there. There was a huge house there just at the corner, and from their house they had a great view. They could see the town clock from the windows upstairs, and Mr. Clemens was quite an old man and very, very lively, and had great eyes, and he could see the time from his own home upstairs from their drawing room. And he had then this egg store, and I don't know whether they gave eggs to the shops. I suppose they did some of it. Well, then there was a Mr. Mackel, what was his name anyway? Had an egg store down Campsie, about where the YMCA building is now. Can't remember his name now.
Well, would they collect eggs from the country people? Or
They collected, yes, they collected eggs. And of course, some country people brought their own eggs into town, and gave them to the shops and helped to pay their grocery bills. And of course, some of the egg people, the merchants, went round to the houses and collected eggs, and maybe had a grocery van and sold stuff to people in the yard. Well, then, in those days, the model bakery had vans that went round the country, and they called once a week usually, and people bought their loaf bread. They didn't buy much, you see, it was mostly all baked at home, but they bought loaf bread and very often if a child went out with the mother, they would give them a bun, a Paris bun. Well, then the entertainments of the town. Most of the dances were held in the courthouse. You went upstairs, you went in the side door and upstairs to the grand jury rooms, and that's where a lot of the dances were held. They may have been held other places, but that was the ones that we went to. The different clubs of the town had different dances, like the football club would have dances, and there'd be a banker's dance, and different dances. And we went, and there was always a lovely supper. Different music, but mostly the old type dances, waltzes and.
What time would the dance start at? When would the entertainment?
It started about 9 o'clock, and it'd go on to about 2 in the morning, and we had to walk to the dances and had to walk out here afterwards. But didn't worry us. Well, then there was a picture house. Now, the picture house was where the Royal Arms ballroom is now. You went into that entry and went up the stairs to where the Royal Arms ballroom is now. That was the picture house. And for children now and again, they had a penny matinee, and you could get in for a penny. In the afternoon, it'll be after school, the penny matinee was, and that was a great thing too for us. The cheap seats were at the front, and the dearer seats were towards the back. And I remember Dr. Thompson of the infirmary, it was called infirmary, the hospital was called infirmary in those days. He was a great man for going to the pictures, and he'd go himself, and he always wore a fur coat, and people would say that they saw Dr. Thompson in his bare skin at the pictures. And then, of course, Saturday night was a great night for going to the pictures. Lots of people from the country would go in the Saturday night to town, and you always went to the pictures. The pictures would start about 8, I suppose, and you were out about 10:30. Well, then Wednesday was usually a half holiday, and the shops were shut. All the shops were more or less shut on half holiday.
Did any shops open on Sunday at all then?
No, no shops open on Sunday. There are no pubs open on Sunday in those days. Well, then, of course, public houses were different in those days. A woman wouldn't been seen going into a public house. It would have been, a disgrace if you. And I remember we sometimes had to collect for the church, and we would go to our own church people. There was a Mr. Wilson had a public house now where.
The El Paso.
Yes, it was about there that his public house was. Of course, there was no road there, of course, in those days. It was grocery shops and shops. And I remember if we had to go in and collect, we'd look up and down the town before you'd go into the shop because it had been an awful disgrace. And no young people ever went in, even at night or anything. There's nothing like that, like there is now. Well, then the butchers in those days killed their own meat, and very often it was in their own premises. Now, in the middle of the town there, just opposite where the old YMCA, opposite Wellwys there was a shop, McConnell's Butchers. I think it's one of the old shops. And when they were going to kill their cattle, they had to take them through their hall out to the backyard. And they'd have great bother getting them past because they could smell the blood in the shop, you see, getting them right down the hall. And many times we watched them chasing them down. So they were killed at the back of the shop. And very often they bought the first lamb of the year. And that lamb was displayed in the shop with decorations, maybe daffodils, or usually daffodils or some sort of display on it. And it was for the judge, for the 2 judges when they came. They were very important people, of course, coming to Omagh. And when they came and were going to the courthouse, there was always a display at the courthouse for them. The military would line up, you know, and they would go and inspect the soldiers. There were usually 2 judges in those days, and they'd have their wigs and robes on and then go in. They really stayed out about a mile out. You know where McLean's shop is, out the hospital road? They stayed there. That house was taken over for them for the week or whatever time they're here, and they had their own servants and all special servants for them too. They were guarded at night and house guarded and all, of course. They were very important people. Well, then, as well as that, there were socials held in the different church halls. That was entertainment too for the people that belonged to the church. And there was always a very nice tea. The ladies provided very nice tea, and they'd have a concert there. And the concerts were also held in the town hall. Now, the town hall, as it was, is different from it is now. But that was the place, most of the concerts. And plays, companies would come there was a company called Doe Bells, and they came and they would have a different play every night, and were very well attended. They were one of the famous people that came.
And they would stay in the locality?
Oh, they would stay in the locality for the week. And then, of course, now and again, the circus would come.
Where would the circus perform?
The circus was usually performed in the showgrounds, where the showgrounds are now. And in the afternoon, they would have a parade through the town with the clowns and all the performers. And I remember when we were in the model school, Mr. Newell would let us out to the rails to see the performance, all these people passing. And of course, after school, nearly everybody went into the circus. And there was performance at night, but the children went in the afternoons. Well, I remember at Christmas they would have a pantomime, and I remember going to Cinderella, and there was a Miss Milligan lived in John Street, and she was the principal. She was Cinderella. I remember seeing her as Cinderella, and it was all local. And you went upstairs the same as you do now in the town hall. And that was the technical too there. There were rooms in that for the technical in those days. And I remember you went in at the side entry to a room on the ground floor, and that was the cookery room. And now and again they had demonstrations at night, cookery demonstrations. One of the ladies would demonstrate, and people went there maybe once a week to these demonstrations of cookery. And usually when they finished cooking, they would give you little samples of whatever they cooked.
Well, did the technical college have night classes then?
Yes, they had night classes, and some of the schools, I remember going for some classes from school, part of the school. Instead of having the cookery in the school, you went there. But at one time they had cookery classes in the schools. But then later on, the badminton, the pavilion in the showgrounds was a badminton hall, and I remember going to it later on.
Did you play badminton?
Played badminton, yes, I played badminton, and it was very well attended. And then some of the church halls had badminton clubs too, as well. St. Columba's now, there was one in St. Columba's, and then later on there was one in First Omagh, and I suppose in some of the others that I don't know about. That was the ones I knew. But then, of course, the transport in those days was different.
Well, you had to walk into school?
We always had to walk. We thought nothing of it. And we used to listen if we were out along the avenue there when the 8:30 train was going into Omagh, we knew we were left in good time, that we'd get in time for 9 o'clock.
And school started at 9 o'clock then?
Yes,
as well?
school started at 9.
What time did it finish at?
3. I think it was 3 in those days. And the school started with religious instruction. First half hour, you see, was your religious instruction.
And that would be Bible reading and then
yes.
discussion on the relevant text there?
Yes. Our transport in those days was pony and trap, you see, into town. And we walked to church. We went to First Omagh, you see, and we walked to church. Well, country people further out drove to church in their ponies and traps. And in Clemond's yard, where the egg store was, they had stables there, and they also had stables in the Royal Arms. That back part of the Royal Arms was all stables. That's now shops. And of course, the other transport was bicycles. And there was a Mr. Steele had a shop. It was next, Steele's yet, isn't it? Yes, it's called Steele still.
The electricals?
He had a shop, and the children all left their bicycles in there in his shop. And of course they got their bicycles repaired there too, but if you went into the shop, there were bicycles and bicycles all stored at the back. And a lot of the children had great fun. They would meet there, you see, in the evening, and It was great fun in Mr. Steele's house, shop at the back, and he nearly knew all the children's bicycles because they were going there every day. But we walked to school. We hadn't anything other transport, only our feet.
Well, then nobody would take the pony and shop was taken nowhere near the church at all. It was always
no. There were no stables, you see, at the churches. Like in the country, country churches, they had stables, but they hadn't. Any of the churches hadn't. It would be either in the Reform stores or the Royal Arms, or else in Clemens's yard. Well, then the Royal Arms met the trains, certain trains, and collected their travellers. Now it wasn't a pony and trap that they had more of a sort of small wagonette or something, driven by horse, and they took it up to the station and collected the travellers. And in those days, of course, the travellers stayed 2 or 3 days and did their business, and the Royal Arms would leave them back, to the station when they're going away.
All the commercial travellers.
Well, of course, anyone else going to the station, you had to find your own way. Either you left in a pony and trap or you walked. Well, then I told you about the Courthouse Hill. It was a special place, and the different events were held. The one for the judges, and of course Armistice Day celebrations or anything like that was held there, and the military would line up, and it was very interesting to watch it all. And also the hiring fair, that was for people were hired their servants. It was held on the Courthouse Hill.
On the steps of the courthouse, or just below the courthouse?
Just below the courthouse, that whole space there at the courthouse. And in those days, the monument, then a Skillen monument, was on the courthouse. And they took it away because of the traffic or something. They thought it was stopping the traffic or something like that. And instead of keeping left, now when the traffic in those days, when you know how you would keep left to go up to the station if you were driving, you kept right round the courthouse. They kept right and went round, right round the monument to go to John Street. I don't know why they did that, but they always did that. Well, the hiring fair was held in November, the first Saturday after the 12th of November, and the 12th of May, the first Saturday. The 12th of November hiring fair was always held in Strabane, you see, and May, on the 12th it was always. But then the Saturday following they had the one in Omagh, and people went in and hired their maid there. I think a maid that we had for years, I think my father got her at the courthouse steps as a young person.
And did she stay with you for 6 months at a time?
Yes. She stayed for 6 months, and then at the end of the 6 months, my father would ask her, are you staying on? That was the thing. He would ask the maid and the working men whether staying on, and then if they were staying on, you didn't have to get another person. So sometimes they stayed on, sometimes they didn't. But most of the work people that my father had, he hired them in Strabane, because it was the big one, and they came from Donegal as young. Just sometimes they were only leaving school, and they'd just have a wee bundle with them, very little with them, and they'd come here, and they didn't write home or anything. It must have been a dreadful time for them.
And very lonely.
Lonely time for them. However, that was
the system
the days just. And if they were very young, they didn't lift their money till they were going home. But the older ones they would ask for some money every week. They would just ask my father for half a crown or something, and he would have it written down in his wee book what they had.
Well then, would your father have to clothe them as well?
Oh no,
be responsible
no. But very often, if my mother had something, she would give it to the maid. But no, they had their own clothes, just whatever they had. Some of them hadn't much, mind you. And they lived in the house, and of course they were fed in the house. And there, they had no hours of working, you know, they worked from morning to night, you must say, nearly. They started about 6 in the morning, and they had to milk in the morning, and the horses had to be fed, you see, before they used the horses. And then at night, in those days, in the winter time, in those days, they usually stopped about 6, but in the winter time, and then at 8 o'clock, all the animals had to be housed for the night, fed and housed for the night, so they had to be back for 8. And I suppose they would spend nearly an hour going round all the cattle and feeding them. It was a very long, long day for them. The maid would never go out. She worked from morning to night too, and it was just the thing to do in those days. And she didn't go out much at night, but the men would maybe go into town between times, but then they would be back for 8 o'clock to feed the animals.
And it was a 7-day week.
In the winter time, that would be more or less in the winter time. In the summertime, you see, they were out in the fields.
Can you remember anything about the RAC men, about what they looked
About-
like? The old,
No, ma. Well, I remember knowing one man very well. His name was McGeown, Sergeant McGeown. And of course the barracks was up at George Street there. And the unmarried men stayed in the barracks, I think. And then the married men had their homes through the town. Well, when cars started, you know, Sergeant McGeown could tell you the number. He knew every car in the district at that time. There weren't so many cars, you see, but he knew all the cars. And of course he knew all the wee boys about the town too. And if he was standing talking to you, a wee boy came along and saw him, they ran like anything, because he knew them all. The ones that were the mischief or did something wrong. The children were afraid of policemen in those days. And of course now and again, when it came to the time when you had a bicycle, if you hadn't a light on your bicycle, it would have come along. And I remember being caught down Campsie one time, and I said, "Where's your light?" And I said, "I haven't got one." And he said, "I'm surprised at James Crammond's daughter not having a light on her bicycle." And I got on the bicycle and after he left me and went on out home. In those days, you see, there were 3 different classes in Omagh. There were the poor people, and then there was the sort of middle class, and then there was what they called the upper 10. There was a lot of upper 10 in Omagh in those days, and they just looked down their nose at it. You see, we had some out here. Colonel Buchanan lived over there where Murnaghan's was, and then there was a Colonel Irvin lived in the red brick house here in those days. And of course, Dr. Fleming lived opposite the tennis court there. You know, the tennis court there in the Crevenagh Road. Well, that tennis court in those days was all upper 10 people. You had to be a special person to get into that tennis court. And it was only the upper 10 played tennis there, and they had one wee corner for croquet for the old ladies. And many times we stood at the gate and watched the tennis. There were grass courts in those days. And every Thursday they seemed to have a special day that they had tea. And of course all the officers were members too. And different people, Mrs. Colonel Buchanan and Mrs. Irvin. I don't think their husbands played, but they went there, and their daughters, and Dr. Fleming's daughters went there. They were good players. Mrs. Buchanan, Mrs. Colonel Buchanan walked into town every day and posted her letters. And Mrs. Irvin, we liked Mrs. Irvin, but we weren't very keen Mrs. Gordon Buchanan. She sort of looked down her nose at you and said, good afternoon. We would nearly run of a gate to meet her. But Mrs. Irvin would talk to us, and Mrs. Irvin, when it came to winter, she started carrying a little lamp. And she stopped one day and she said, I'm sure you notice I have a little lamp with me. And she said, I was walking out the road and it was dark. You see, there was no lights out the road in those days. The lights stopped at Auchinleck's there, Darling's. And it was pitch dark from that out. There were far more trees in those days out this road. And it was a very quiet road. And Mrs. Irvin said that somebody came and looked into her face when she was walking along. And then after that, she carried this little lamp, and she said she would see who it was, if there's anyone that's going to annoy her.
Well, then, the middle class families that you mentioned, what areas of Omagh?
Well, the shopkeepers and the farming community would be. At school now, there were wee fees at school, at the model school. There's some of the children paid sixpence a quarter, and the middle class paid 2.9. I think we paid 2.9 a quarter at the model school. In other schools, they had no fees, but they had at the model school. And then 2 or 3, maybe the bigger farmers, maybe they paid 5 and 6. You know, there were those 3 fees in those days. Of course, at the high school, it was a private school, you paid fees, and also at the academy in those days. And you bought your own books. You'd always to buy your own books, all the books. Connell's was a shop for buying books, and you bought them in school too. Jotter would be a penny, you know, but I wouldn't bother getting the pennies in those days. And you had to buy your own pencils, and I think pens were supplied, and ink. There were little ink bottles, you know, in each desk. Well, if they lived in Castle Street, they were very poor in those days. And there were other parts of the town too that were poor, and the children were dirty too. You know, you didn't want to sit beside them in school. There was nobody coming round examining them in those days, you know, to see if they were clean. And if they come out, some of the houses were really dirty. They didn't have trodden. Their hairs would be dirty, you know. But there was the circumstance they were living in. You see, they were terrible when you think of it. Then, as times changed, you see, the children changed too, and people changed. Well, then some of the solicitors would be the upper 10, and some of them weren't. You know, some of them were just ordinary farmers' sons that became solicitors. Well, there, Miss Cahoon, you know, Miss Cahoon there, the solicitor. Well, her father was a solicitor before, but she was really a farmer, or his father. Well, then there were 1 or 2 farmers like that their sons just became solicitors in town. Roundtree now, they came to Omagh, the Roundtrees. I don't know where they started, but that family came to Omagh as solicitors. And Murnahans would have been local. I think the Murnahans were always local people of Omagh. There was a Dr. Duncan. He lived in the terrace up at the head of the town, still there. I think the Lagans would be local too. And Dr. Lagan's father, he lived in Campsie, in one of those big houses in Campsie. And he was a very famous man, you know, he was a great big man. And he went to all the dances, and he danced to all the young people at the dances. His wife didn't go to the dances, but he went always, and he danced to all the young people. He was very, very friendly always. And then our doctor was, well, first of all, when we came to Omagh, our doctor was Dr. Fleming because he was the nearest doctor. My father said the nearest doctor in the nearest church, you see, would be where we'd go. And then when he died, then we went to Dr. Lagan, I think, for a while. And he was up at Church Street there, was his place. And then Dr. Duncan was our next doctor, and he lived in that terrace. And then we ended up with Dr. Mitchell in Campsie, father of this Dr. Mitchell. He lived in Campsie. So that was the different doctors. But Dr. Mitchell, if he wanted a second opinion, he always brought out Dr. Lagan. You know, if he knew there was something very serious and he wanted to bring out Dr. Lagan, and Dr. Lagan was an awful nice man. Everybody liked him. We were at school, and suddenly the airplane started going over the town and going quite low and throwing down little papers and everything, and then the news got round that war was over. And I remember we just tore out of the school. I don't know whether I suppose the teacher couldn't keep us in, and people went parading up and down the town and hugging and kissing, and the soldiers were there, and you know, it was great excitement. And school was over for that day anyhow. Well, we weren't in at night. I'm sure there was more excitement at night in the town. Well, then, of course, when the Second World War came, there were big drafts of soldiers came, and they hadn't enough room in the barracks, and they took over some of the church halls. Trinity Church Hall was taken over, I think, and Methodist and other halls in the town, and they fed them in the pavilion. They took over the pavilion in the showgrounds, and they marched down the town. The different battalions or the different groups of them marched down to the pavilion for their food. And I remember when there was a Welsh regiment here, and they always sang or whistled. You know, they were musical, and they always sang or whistled as they went along. Oh, then when the Americans came, of course, they took over the town. There was great excitement when they came, and they had so much money to spend and nothing to spend on, and they were going out with big bottles of whiskey stuck in their pockets, and they had a great time. And then, of course, when the dark Americans came, then there was fun. The two regiments didn't agree. And my sisters, they were dancers, and I remember they were at a dance in the courthouse, and my sister was dancing. The white Americans, and suddenly the white American says, I'm leaving here. A dark man had appeared at the door. I wouldn't, he says, stay any longer. And he just left her standing there, and away he went. And the same in the pubs. If they went in and there was a dark fellow in the pubs, that happened all over the north. I remember my brother, he was in town on the Saturday night, and an American come over to him and he says, have you a knife? He says, what do you want a knife for? I want to stick that fellow over there. He was a dark fellow and he was talking to a girl. Oh, they had to keep them apart. Well, then they took over the Royal Arms at that time, the Americans, as a club, and lots of the girls were invited to go there. My two sisters went there a night in the week. I think it was a Sunday night they went, and they talked to the soldiers, and they would sew on buttons for them, you know, and do little things like that for them. Some of them came and stayed maybe from Ecclesfield, from Fintna, and would stay there maybe for the weekend. They would have leave, you see, and stay there, and then on different nights, different girls went different nights, and then they had entertainments for the girls. They were taken up to maybe a ball, a dinner in Ecclesfield House, I think it was, and they they were all left home to their own homes. Each one was left back. I think they collected them in Omagh, but when they brought them back, they left them each to their own homes. They're quite strict about that.
I believe the MPs and the military police were quite severe on any of the American soldiers who were impounded.
Oh yes, I remember hearing about Christmas Eve night. You know, it was a great night. That they just went round and collected all the Americans and took them home. They weren't able to walk, I think.
Dumped into a jeep
and they got a pony and trap at one time. They got a pony and trap from somebody about the town, and they called the pony constipation. And somebody said to them, "Why did you call the pony constipation?" He says, "It couldn't pass a thing." And I remember we had soldiers out helping in the harvest. They came out and helped in the harvest if you wanted extra help, and at the potato gathering, and we had them out there. They would come out and have their dinner, and they enjoyed getting out. And I remember one of them had the horse and cart, you see, and he was going up to the field with the horse and cart, and he caught in one of the gates. He said, "Push." And he says, "This thing won't steer me. I can't get it steered like a car." Well, then at one time the military, in the Second World War, they had a great manoeuvre on, and from all the roads in Omagh, they arrived in Omagh, all the military, for whatever it was, and the whole town was blocked with people. And they came out here and took over the 2 rooms in our house. They took over the kitchen, and they took over the dining room, which was to the front room, as a wireless room. And then they could phone over to the Dublin Road. They took over houses there too, in the Dublin Road. And I remember coming in from school, and I didn't know what had happened. They had all their stuff in it, and they started cooking on the... It was a black range was there, you know, and coal. And my mother, she told them about how they were making the dinner, you see. They hadn't half enough fire on, you know, and she went in and told them. And they brought in all their own utensils and their food, and they brought in the loaves, and they threw them down on the floor. And Mother says, I couldn't look at them lying on the floor. I went away and got trays and put the trays underneath them. So they stayed all night, and they asked, could some of them sleep in the barn? And Father said, our barn's not clean, but you can sleep in the house. And the soldiers that were in charge of the cooking, and they just slept on the kitchen floor and in the hall. And then a young officer came along, and they asked, could he have a bed for the senior officer, colonel or whatever he was. So Mother took him upstairs and took him to the spare room, our guest room, and said he could have that bed. And she said, what about you? Oh, he says, I can lie on the floor. And she says, there's another wee room there you could have. So when he came down to the kitchen, he was telling the other men, he says, do you know, I'm getting a real bed tonight with sheets on it. So they were there all night, and Father took the officer and this other fella in and gave them drinks, you know, and had a chat with them. And then they said, if you hear a noise in the middle of the night, it means that we've got word to move on. However, they were there all night, and they didn't get moving. And some of them they had their vehicles and everything with them, and some of them were sleeping just in the vehicles, and they were all along the Dublin Road there. And it was lovely weather. And some of them asked for a drink, and somebody brought them out buttermilk, thinking they would like buttermilk, and they thought they were being poisoned. They were English fellas or something, you see. So About 10, they were there for the breakfast in the morning, and Mother gave them eggs to make them for their breakfast, and they cooked the breakfast, and they were still there. And just about 10 o'clock, she thought she'd make them a cup of 10 o'clock tea. And just as she had the tea made, they got word to go. And the officer came in and said, we've got to move on. They had all packed at that time, all their stuff packed, and out of the kitchen, and they washed the floor, or swept the floor, and even in the dining room they went and tidied the dining room. And they apologised. I think it was linoleum was on the floor, and they apologised that they hadn't time to polish it. And they took all their stuff with them anyhow. And Mother said, I have a cup of tea ready. Will you not give them a few minutes? 5 minutes. And so she gave them the cup of tea, and then off they went. And they were all over the town at that night. It was some sort of manoeuvres just they were having, and they all landed in Omagh.
And that was the Allied soldiers, that was the Americans and the...
No, that wasn't Americans, that was
the British,
that was the British.
Scottish and Welsh.
It was the British, no, the Americans weren't. The Americans, no, even those people that we had out at the harvest time, they were British. They were British soldiers from the barracks. The only time we had Americans was my father came out to go into one of those fields there, and there was a jeep sitting out there, and fellas, and they had a lot of drink with them. So they offered him the drink, but whatever it was, he said he would take a drink, but it wasn't. It was something he didn't like, anyways. But anyway, they gave him 5 or 6 tons back with them anyway. Of course, everything was rationed. But then people that lived on a farm, you see, they had their own milk, and they had their own butter, and they had their own eggs and bacon. You weren't supposed to kill animals, but most of them had their own bacon, and like we weren't short, not very short anyway, but you only got so much meat, you know, butcher's meat and things like that. Everything else was rationed. Butter was rationed too, and sugar. Of course, people went over the border for the sugar. There was a train went to Bundoran every Sunday, and they called it the sugar train. And everybody went and bought sugar. Sometimes they lost it on the way. It was taken from them. And cigarettes, of course, were scarce, and they would go to Bundoran and get cigarettes. No, there was very little in papers. You didn't know very much what was going on.
Even in the churches, did the churches...
No, you didn't. It was all kept quiet. And you were told, you know, if you were travelling on train, or not to talk to people or anything like that, you know, about war or anything like that, because they could be spies. Some of them could be spies.
Did you ever listen to Lord Haw's broadcasts here?
Oh yes, people listened to them. Anyone's had a wireless. Of course, there's no television, so some people had wirelesses, and they'd listen to them. I don't think we listened to them. We were too young, couldn't be bothered to listen to them.
What was the name of that school again?
The school was called Crevenagh Primary School.
How did you get the job? Was it advertised or?
Well, the last year when everybody was applying for schools in your second year at Stranmillis, it was Stranmillis I was trained in, and during the last quarter or so, everybody's applying for schools all over the place. And then I applied for this school. I didn't know where it was or anything, and I think there was another wee local school somewhere I applied for, and of course I forgot all about it. Came home and we're in holidays, and I was in town this Saturday. When we came out, Mother said, "There's a minister here to see you." It was a Presbyterian school, you know, belonged to a church, and he wants to speak to you about this school. So of course I took him into the dining room and he began to ask me questions. He asked me would I teach in Sunday school, and I said no. I said, they see me all week, that'll be enough. And they said, was I musical? And I said no. He said, could you not play the organ? And I said no. So I didn't think I would be appointed. However, I was appointed anyhow. And my father left me down. At that time we had a car, but the car wasn't used in the ordinary way as it is now, you know. It was only used for himself, more or less. He left me down anyhow. And then I was staying with the teacher and her sister. And then I got a bicycle. And I cycled home every weekend there. Blow high or blow low, I wouldn't have stayed for anything. So they didn't get any good of me out of the church. The first day I went to the school was September. You see, you started in September in the country school. We couldn't get the door open. Somebody had put stones in the lock. The teacher had to send down to a farmer to come up and clear the lock before we got in. And when we got inside, the school was just a wreck, you might say. It had the same type of wee windows in it as Barnscourt Estate. So it must have been a very old school. You know, those little panes. And it was just one room with a fireplace in one end, a big fireplace in one end. And I was in the end that had no fireplace. The children went down to a well and brought a bucket of water from the well every day. Two boys went down to a well, which was quite a bit away from I never knew where the well was. And of course there were wee outside toilets. There were awful wee toilets. And we had no playground. When you took them out for drill, in those days it was called drill, you took them out on the main road. And I remember having mine out one day, and the first thing I saw was Smith's bull coming up the road. And they just played in the rocks behind the schoolroom. There were just rocks, and they played in those rocks. And I made them all climb over the wall and hide in behind there till the bull went up past the school. And I remember one time the inspector was there for the day. You knew the day he was coming, you see. And he asked Miss Mitchell to take her children out for drill, and I was to take mine out. She went up the road and I was down the road, and we were having drill, and suddenly a horse and cart came up the road, and he said, "That'll do now." And I remember Miss Mitchell saying to me, "It's just as well, for I didn't know much more." We hardly ever took them out.
Well then, in that primary school, would a clergyman have called often to check up on religious education? The Reverend
Anderson was supposed to call, but he never bothered. He never came near us. And it was a mixed school. We had Catholics and Protestants, and the Catholic children went home half an hour early, and then the religious instruction for the rest was taken. And it was a good idea because there was no fighting on the way home. Some of them were away home, you see. You never drowse on the way home. Well, then a priest came to the neighbourhood, a new priest came to the neighbourhood, and he said that she'd go to the school at Spomont. Well, there was a headmaster there that had a name of being very strict. And some of them went and stayed about 2 days and just came back again. Well, they were all in cotter houses around the farms, you see, and they played together. We never had any bother about religion in the school. Well, then later on I got friendly with a farmer's daughter near there, and we joined badminton. And Castledergan, we cycled into Castledergan. It was 3 miles to Castledergan. We'd cycle in 2 nights a week there. And I lived quite well, quite a good life there when I got to know people.
How long was the teacher training course in Stranmullis then?
2 years. First of all, I was a monitress in the model school in Omagh for 3 years. I left the academy and was appointed. There were about 4 of us were appointed at that time as monitors, and then we took the King's Scholarship from there. We had an hour in the morning lessons from the different teachers, and then we taught all day or helped in the classrooms all day. And then the King's Scholarship examination came up, and if you passed, you were called to Stranmillis.
But you weren't paid as a monitor?
You were paid some very small wee bit, something I forget now, quarter or something. A pound or two or something, I don't remember what it was.
And it was like an apprenticeship?
Yes, you served your time, I suppose you could say, nearly.
Well, then when you went up to Belfast, did you live in Stranmillis itself, in the college?
My sister, she was in the model school too. She was older than I was, only she had done her intermediates, and she was a pupil teacher in the model school. So she only did 2 years, I think, as apprentice, and then she was called up, and she was in the first group that went to Stranmillis. Well, at that time we had our lectures in Queen's, some lectures in Queen's, and a day in the technical, some lectures in the technical, and we stayed in digs up the Stranmillis Road, and we walked most of the times because we had to save our money. We'd walk maybe to Queen's. If we were going to the technical was right down at the station there in those days, and we'd walk to Queen's and get the penny stage then down. Otherwise it would be tuppence, you see.
And did you travel back to home every time?
No, we only got home at the end of the quarters. No, there was no. When we went up in September, we went home till Christmas, and the same. You got home when you went back at Christmas. You were only home at Easter, and then home at summer. No, there was no travelling about in those days. Well, then we were in digs, you see. Well, then, in her second year, she was called. They had bought Stranmillis House, and they turned it into a boarding house for her. But they only took the first year people, at that time they only took the senior girls, and I was in digs then. And then I changed to the Lisburn Road to be in digs with another friend from 6 Mile Cross, and we were in digs then all our first year, and then we were in Stranmillis. They had built bungalows at that time, and we were then in Stranmillis in our second year. And when you went in at night, you didn't get out, you know. When lectures were over, you went back for your dinner, and you weren't out. The only night you got out was Saturday and Sunday, and you had to sign what time you went out, and then you had to be in at 10 o'clock, back at 10. So there was no running about Belfast. We couldn't afford it anyway.
Well, then when you started to teach, was it a shock to you to go into a class and to be faced with all the other?
No, it wasn't a shock to me because we taught in the model school.
And so you were well prepared.
But it was a shock to some of the girls that had never faced. There were some girls maybe that hadn't done a monitor those years that we had done.
Well, that wasn't compulsory then if you wanted to teach?
No, it mustn't have been, because some of them had never faced a class. And you see, in Stranmillis, when your turn came round, you had to take a class. We were sent out, you know, through every week, a day in the week, out through the city, 2 different schools, and you had to teach a class for a half an hour or something. You had lessons prepared that you had to take, maybe an arithmetic lesson, you see. You had to have it prepared. And then there were supervisors who went round with us, and they took notes of what you did. And well, then once or twice in the term, the whole students gathered and you had to teach a class in front of all the students. And of course the supervisors were all there too, and then they criticised your lesson. Well, it wasn't so bad for the people that had been teachers, you know. We weren't so bad, but some of them had never faced a class and they didn't know what to do. My friends weren't all from this part, but my friend from 6 Mile Cross, she went back and she was teaching in a local school. And of course I was local. I was able to come home on weekends. But lots of them got into other schools. Now my sister, she was, her first school was Castle Caulfield. And then she was only there about 2 years, and then she went to Derry Model, and she got married when she was in Derry Model. And most of the city girls now, they got into the city schools because they were known, you see, and it was quite difficult in those days to get a school to go to. You know, there weren't many vacancies.
Well then, in an area like Omagh, like this vicinity, how difficult was it to get a job? Did it depend really on
Omagh?
Somebody that you knew, or maybe you said that the Presbyterian minister?
Well, I was those 7 years or so in Maher Cregan, and when an appointment came up in model school, there was a committee of men, and first of all I applied for an appointment 1 year, and there were local girls. There were 3 local girls at that time in Omagh, and one of the local girls got in that year. Well, then the next year there were 3 vacancies, and of course I applied for one. I wanted to be an infant teacher. That time the schools were changed. It was all one building then. At that, you see, there was no infant school. It was all a mixed school, and I applied for the school and by the second time, and I went round some of the committee, and there was a man up this road, Mr. Wilson. He was on the committee, and I went up to him and he says, "I'll get you in this time." He says, "I didn't know you'd applied the last time, or you'd have got in the last time." So I got in then. I was there from 1933 till I left in I did my 40 years. I started in 1925, and 1965 I retired. And when I sent in my resignation, I got back word to say I was 1 day off that I shouldn't have been off, and they were going to take a day's pension from me. And I said, "They're not going to take a day's pension from me. I'll teach another quarter." So I went on then to Halloween. The inspectors came once a year, and they all, to the model school here, they all came. In country schools, one inspector would come, you see. And, well, there was a cookery inspector came, and she was different, cookery and needlework, but the one inspector would come. But in the model school, they all had a certain day that they came. You knew that they were coming, and they were all over the place. They would go to the different classes, you know, and they would maybe spend 2 days, and that was pretty awful. I remember one time there was very, very heavy snowfall all over, and we'd been out playing badminton, Ballygolly, and we got stuck halfway, and we had to walk from that home, and we were about 2 hours in bed when it was time to get up. And I remember they left me into the gasworks there in the horse and cart. It's the only way, the whole avenue there was filled up. We had to go through the field. And when we got into school, of course, there weren't many children there. But the first thing happened was all the inspectors arrived there because they couldn't go out to the country, you see, and wanted to put in their day. And they all landed in with us. I could have seen them far enough. I was half sleeping. And then, of course, later on then, the doctor came. And I remember the first time the doctor came, it was Dr. Chambers from Crevenagh, and he was fairly oldish and rather gruff looking, you know, and when the children saw them, they all started crying before they even looked at him. I think they don't know what they thought of this doctor. I think he was disgusted with them, but he didn't understand that they didn't know anything about a doctor. Well, I had infants nearly always, and we had very big classes in those days. You'd have 40 and 50 in your class, and the children, a lot of the children came in just after Easter, or would come at that time. Well, then you didn't get rid of the others until the end of the term, with the result that I had of all that year's children plus the ones that came in.
Did you have an assistant in the class?
No, you had nobody. No such thing.
There was a headmistress then in the models.
Yes.
Did it change then to one principal over the whole lot, or was it still the 3 separate principals?
It changed to one headmaster.
Right. And who was the headmaster then?
Mr. Newell.
Where was he from Omagh?
Yes, he was an Omagh man, and he had two sisters that lived round Irish Town there at that time. And then later on he lived at the rope walk. Do you know where the rope walk was? Round there. But he was the headmaster.
Did he teach himself in the school, or was it?
Yes, he taught too. Yes, in those days he taught as well. The teacher next door, there was usually a petition just. He would open the door, and the teacher next door, if he wanted to go round the classes, he would sort of look after his class till he came back. And he'd go round, and just see if there's anything wanted or anything like that. I think they had a day for parents to come, but very few parents came to those. It was only the headmaster would be there, and very few parents would turn up for those meetings. They didn't bother coming, but a lot of them would leave the smaller ones to school, and if they had anything to complain about, they would complain. And of course, if there was something to complain about, they would come just to the school, to the headmaster. Oh, Mr. Newell had the cane.
And was it a common sound throughout the
well,
school?
we were all allowed to have a cane, but we didn't use it that much. But if some of the senior boys that he had, he gave them good slaps.
Well, then looking
and
back,
if you had a troublesome one in your class, you could send them to Mr. Newell, and he would punish them, send them back. You were really better to punish them yourself.
'Tis many's a gay night from dark till daylight I spend with people of high renown. But in all their grandeur and heaps to squander, my heart would wander for sweet Omagh town.